Some say that copyright should last beyond the author's death. But really, why should it? I don't agree that it should, and the people who say that it should kind of really just make an arbitrary ethical stance. But I say that ethical stance is quite bad, since it doesn't really make any sense. But even if we talk about the technicalities, then what is the actual technical effect that it has? Why should a work remain under copyright after the author has died? Why? That's just my question. Why? Like, they talk about, like, oh, but the family and whatever. But, like, why? I mean, I recognize that, like, you say that, oh, it's to support the family of, like, the offspring or someone else who may inherit the estate, who cares? But, like, why? Just why? I mean, that's what you say you would do, and that's what you say it's for, but why? That's my question. Why? Is there some actual reason? If you just say that you ethically believe that, okay, that's what I believe in, like, that's my inherent fundamental belief, then, yeah, well, fine. Well, if that's the case, then the discussion is already over. I just say that that's a really bad stance, that's a really not good moral position to have, but if you say that there is some technical reason for it, and I say there really should be, because we are talking about copyright, and copyright is a technical compromise. So, yeah, because, like, it's a compromise because, of course, fundamentally the people would have the ability to do all the things that copyright tells them not to do. So the existence of copyright arbitrarily restricts what people can do. So the fact that it exists at all, which kind of just violates the people's freedoms to do whatever they want, well, there must be some technical reason to apply that law, so that there could be some other place where that technical law results in more freedom for the people in some circumstances. Like, there must be something like that, at least in the argument that the copyright law makes. Now, whether that actually happens, whether the copyright law actually succeeds, that's a different thing. But at least the premise of copyright law is that it's a technical compromise. So it restricts some freedoms, but it promotes some other good thing in the world. Right? So, what is the technical reason for a person who holds copyright, who made the work, after they're dead, that work is still under copyright? Since to me it looks like copyright was supposedly about putting food to the table of the author. But if the author is dead, then, like, I'm sure you can see the problem. Like, wasn't copyright supposed to be about putting food to the table of the author? Now that's my assumption, that, like, that's what it's about. Now if you think it's about something else, well, yeah, do contribute to the discussion, but that's, like, what it seems like to me. That it's like a compromise, because if there is no copyright law, then the author will starve because no one gives them money. Like, that's the argument copyright makes. Now, whether it's true or not, that's a different thing. But that's at least the argument the copyright law makes. But then, if copyright law lasts beyond the death of the author, why does the author need food on their table? Well, I guess then the people would dispute that. Well, it's not just about the food for the author, it's also about the offspring. But then, again, I ask, why? Why? Is there a reason for that? Why should the offspring of the author, or whoever inherits the estate, get anything from that work? Why? Like, really? That's it, like, just why? Like, I don't really have much else to say about that, other than it doesn't make any sense. I don't see why it should. I mean, I disagree with that, like, I can explain why I disagree with and all that sort of thing, but, like, to you, what I have to ask from you is that, why? I don't see any world in which that makes any sense. It's ridiculous. Why? Just why? There's no purpose for that. It makes no sense. If you just believe in the philosophical position, like I said earlier, and I'm just repeating myself, if you just believe that ethically, well, their family just deserves that, just because it's your ethical stance. You just believe that there is this way in the universe where they just inherently deserve that. That's what's right, and them not getting it is wrong. If that's what you believe, then yeah, that's a rather silly moral belief. I don't know what kind of a moral framework you are operating under if that's the kind of thing that you believe is a fundamental part of like the nature of universe and all that sort of stuff. If like you believe that there is this inherent right that they just deserve it, that's weird. That's really weird. That's a rather odd ethical stance. That's a weird moral framework. Yeah, that's a strange position to hold. But if you believe that there is an actual technical reason for it, then what is it? Because I can't see any reason. I can't see any reason. There is none, just none. Consider the fact that copyright, it denies the public, the people, various rights to use that work. It better be something damn important that so much freedom is being denied from the people that it's worth taking that away from them. It better be something really important. What is it? I haven't heard it. I haven't heard the argument. What is the argument? I haven't heard it. Like really, just no. Like I might be able to make some theories, some speculation as to why someone might support that. That might actually be in contradiction with what they say might be the reason. But I think it might be a different reason why they actually really support it. They just say something else. It may be because, well, they just want it because someone whose ancestors are some great authors who made some works and they still profit to this day. Well, of course, those people would personally benefit from the situation, so naturally they would like to promote an idea that benefits their personal best interest. So whatever rationalization they might come up with to justify that support of theirs for that idea of extending copyright beyond the author's death is of course total nonsense, because it's really just about their personal best interest. And it could also go the other way around too, where the great author just wants to guarantee like their offspring's well-being in the future. That's the same kind of argument really, like that's the same kind of line of reasoning, because it doesn't have to be just about your best interest. It could be like your descendants, because like people have of course a natural biological interest to consider their offspring's best interest as well. So like I can see some reasons as to why people might support that sort of a system, but like, you know, that's kind of a selfish position, isn't it? Because we're talking about society, and society includes everyone, not just you and your offspring. So everyone needs to be considered, not just you and your offspring. So even if it is in your and your offspring's best interest, it might not be in the best interest of the people as a whole. And when we make societal rules that apply to everyone, then we have to consider everyone, not just you and your offspring and your ancestors, depending on where you are in that line of succession. So whether you are the artist yourself or someone who inherits from the artist, you know, there's a lot of other people out there in the world than just you and your family tree. So what right is it of yours, if you are not the author, to deny the public their freedoms just because your ancestor did something great? Yeah, that's kind of a selfish position, isn't it? Now, I understand that if that's your fundamental ethical stance, then that's what it is. But it doesn't stop me from describing it as what it is. That's very selfish. And I also believe that it doesn't go in line with the best interests of the people as a whole, even if it benefited you and a select few of people who happen to be descendants of some authors. It doesn't serve the people. It's a net loss for society, I say. Because, well, I mean, it's kind of obvious. You're denying the people the freedom to use the art and other works that copyright covers, however they choose to use them. You know, consider this. if a person reads a book that changes their life and like gives some profound meaning to their life and all kinds of things like that. Now, if that book is under copyright, that means that that person whose life has now been changed by that book, if that person now wishes to express their person, like to express oneself, as with art, people express themselves and such things. So if that person now chooses to write books, and the books would be similar to the book that changed their life, because that's what they want to do, because they want to express their person, and their person was changed by that book. It is now limited what they can do, because that book is still under copyright. Now that's just one arbitrary example, but the premise extends from there, and it kind of works the same way, because if you can understand that, then you can understand the kind of relationship that a person might have with like art and culture and such, where, of course, to varying extents and in different ways, culture is a part of the people and their way of life and their person, and like it's just like if you have some really culturally important work, some artwork that's very relevant to the people, it's a part of those people and it's a part of that culture. So if those people are not allowed to express their own culture and their own like ideas and such parts of their life, then like you are arbitrarily restricting that ability for those people to freely express themselves. I make the argument that derivative art is an equally valid way to make art than quote original unquote art. Now again, if you just disagree with that from an ethical point of view, that you just don't believe that's the case, where you believe that some art is valid and other arts are invalid, well that's a sad position to hold. But I say derivative arts, no matter how derivative, no matter how close to another art, they are all valid forms of art. They are all human expression, they are all culture and such things all the same. So no matter how heavily inspired by another work someone's work is, it's still all equally valid, I say. So you have to then make the argument that you recognize some art and other things that copyright covers as being invalid, because you believe that the people should not have the freedom to make those things. You believe that people should not have the right to express themselves however they choose to do so. You have to make that argument, because if you support copyright, that is what you fundamentally do, and you have to recognize that. I of course disagree with that to an extent, but of course then the argument is made that like, well, the people giving up those freedoms temporarily for a short period of time as a compromise to give those authors some money so that they can put food on the table, and that would promote more works being made because it gives a monetary incentive to create those arts in the first place, then like that's a compromise. That's a compromise. The people give up that freedom to freely express themselves and all that sort of stuff, as well as sharing exact copies of works. I did not talk about sharing yet, but it's also important, I say, as well. So if I am to talk about it as well, sharing is just promotion of goodwill, in that when people are sharing things with each other, that's just a useful thing to do, because, well, you know, it's kind of hard to describe, I guess, but like, again, it's kind of like just it's an ethical stance, in that if you ethically do not agree that people should have the right to distribute copies of exact works, well, that's just an ethical stance, and yeah, I would disagree with that, because I believe that people do have the fundamental moral and ethical right to share. I just say that it's inherently good just because it is a good thing. But if I need to give some technical justification for it, or some technical reason why one might wish to keep it, well, I mean, I guess it is just a useful thing, because when people are distributing things, like, they are then helping those people who receive those things, because those things that are being distributed might be of use. So yeah, promoting the art and culture, you're basically just spreading it out there. So if you are restricting the amount of sharing that can take place, you are in effect restricting the amount of spreading that art can do. So the less it spreads, well, it naturally follows that the less exposure and less presence that art has. So you're kind of just limiting the amount of influence that art may have in the world, and like if the purpose of art being made in the first place is that you want people to see that art. If you're talking about a painting or a book or who cares, I'm just gonna call it art. That art is just a placeholder for all the artsy things. So if the purpose of creating the art in the first place is so that people get to experience that art, then why restrict its flow? Why restrict the distribution of the art? If you made the art for the people to experience, then why should you want to restrict the flow of that art and how far it spreads? Because that's what you're doing. You are literally, by law, denying the people the right to distribute, to share that art. So you are hindering its spread. You are not promoting its spread at all. You are doing the opposite. You are telling people not to share it. So in my mind, that kind of defeats the purpose. Because if you make the art for the people to experience, then why should you want to not allow them to experience it? Because that's what you're doing. The people who don't get the copy from other people sharing it to them, they don't get the copy. So you are just that's the argument, yeah. So back to copyright being a compromise. All that good stuff is under the premise of copyright being traded away for other benefits. So the public gives up all that important stuff that I just described to be good, the sharing and the culture, the derivative works and all that stuff. The people give that up temporarily for a short period of time so that the artists who made that stuff can put food on the table. That's the premise of copyright. So again, whether it succeeds or not, that's different, but that's at least the premise. We have to at least understand what we are talking about. So that's what the argument copyright makes is. Right. So then, I ask again, why? With all that in mind, now think about it, why should the copyright keep lasting on and on and on? However many decades the author may live, however many decades after that, it just keeps lingering on and on and on. The people's rights are being denied. Every second the people don't have those rights is another second the people give away, supposedly in a compromise, to trade away that for something else. But what is it that they receive? You have to actually make a technical argument if you subscribe to the idea that what I just described as those two good things, the culture and the derivative works and the distribution being good things that are being traded away. If you subscribe to that idea that copyright is a compromise, and you don't just believe in the arbitrary ethical idea that, I just believe it's a fundamental ethical good, that the author just deserves infinite copyright just because. If you subscribe to the idea that copyright is a compromise, and the things that the public gives away are actually good, but that they are given away in a trade to receive something else, then what is that something else? What is it that the people get? Because if copyright is a compromise where the public trades away those good things, the ability to share and promote the art and the culture and the derivative works, if the people gives that away, what do they get back? What is it that they get back? Tell me what it is, because I don't know. If the copyright lasts for decades after the author has long since died, what on earth are the people getting from it? What are they getting from it? What are they trading away those rights for? The people giving up the things that are as important as the things that I just described. What are they giving up for? Is there a reason for it? What is it? What could the descendants of long since dead authors possibly give to the people in exchange for all those lost freedoms? Because you have to remember, the people are giving up those freedoms. And if copyright is supposed to be the compromise where the people get something in return for exchanging those freedoms away, what is it? What do they get? What do they get? I can at least understand the premise of a short copyright that lasts temporarily for a short, limited number of years. I can at least understand the premise there. Now, whether it actually works and succeeds at it, well, that's a different thing. And that's not what this speech is about. But at least I can understand what is it that they are trying to do. I can at least understand why that system will be implemented. I can understand the compromise. I can recognize that by the people giving up those freedoms, they give like this monetary incentive to the authors, and then the authors can get like all the stuff and like, yeah, but like why should it last beyond the author's death? Why? What do the people get back from it? Nothing. Nothing is what I say they get. Nothing. There's nothing they get. Absolutely and utterly nothing. The people don't get anything back. I say copyright is promoted by either evil people or people who are just clowns or people who are just confused. So, yeah, that's what I say. Evil people, of course, are those who just want to promote evil in the world. Clowns are the ones who are just... They have bad systems, they believe in bad morals, bad ethics. Then, like, confused people are just those who don't seem to understand what we are talking about. They don't understand the concepts of the compromises and such. And of course, that's very arbitrary. I'm kind of being hyperbolic there. There really aren't any categories of people. I'm just talking nonsense now about these categories, the clowns and the evil people and confused people. That's just nonsense. But if we get back to talking seriously, that copyright does not serve any purpose. But of course, it is true that there are a lot of evil people who would support the copyright lasting on and on, because there are all these corporate types and such who would benefit from just like holding all the copyright for all the works, and they are in a position where they benefit at the expense of the people. So of course there would be all kinds of evil people out there, but like, yeah, but like, why? Like, are people like I mean, obviously there's some truth to what I just said about the categories of people. Like, are people just some people just really genuinely confused and they just don't understand? And like, I mean, I understand also that people in general are prone to thinking in terms of retaining the status quo as well. So whatever the status quo happens to be, they just take that as an inherent good and they just wish to promote it. Oh, I'm not in favor of these drastic changes. I would just like to do some slight reforms. Yeah, only like minor modifications, because it's just about retaining the status quo. Yeah, the copyright is kind of bad, but like it doesn't need to be removed entirely, and like, because it's just the status quo. Only for that reason. If there was no copyright, they wouldn't be in favor of implementing one. Or maybe a minor compromise we could do, but there's no way I would be giving up all these freedoms. That's what they would say if there was no copyright. Because like a large chunk of people, I believe, they just don't think, they just want to retain the status quo. Now that's just speculation. I haven't actually run any tests on people, and I don't have any demographic data for that, but that's just my guess. You know, those are just theories and guesswork, really, on me trying to guess what the people may be thinking. But like, I mean, there gotta be a couple of clowns as well out there who they genuinely they believe that, well, the author just inherently deserves that just because it's their work, so they deserve all the control over it, and they get to restrict the people however they choose because it's theirs. It just fundamentally belongs to them because they wrote it. You know, that's kind of arbitrary, because then we are talking about ethics. Well, does the author just inherently deserve that? Well, if that's what you believe, then that's what you believe. But I mean, that's kind of a bad moral system, I say. That's very ridiculous, and it does not promote anything good in the world. So yeah, I mean, there have to be at least some people who just think like that just because. Yeah, well, anyway, yeah, I say it is of no use for copyright to last beyond just a few years at most, because that's the whole point, that it gives this temporary power to the author so that they have like this monetary incentive and whatever. And then after this short period of time, the copyright lapses. That's the whole point. That's what the copyright is for. That's what it is. It's a compromise. It's a compromise where the public, they trade away some of their important rights temporarily, very temporarily, for a short period of time. It needs to be a short period of time, so that they can get something else in exchange. Because by giving those authors the powers, they would get some monetary incentives and such things, and that might promote the creation of further art more than what would be created otherwise. That's the premise of copyright. Now, whether I actually consider copyright a success, whether it actually works, that's a different thing. That's not what we discuss in this speech. But what we are discussing is the fact that if that's the copyright system we are going to implement, then why is it that we have a system where copyright lasts on and on and on and on? Why? Is there a reason for it? What is the people getting back? What are they getting? What are they getting? What? Nothing. I say nothing. There is nothing they get. It's being taken from them. The freedoms that are important, sharing, and the derivative works, they are taken. I believe derivative art is all valid. Of course, one might make the argument that all art is derivative to varying extents, and that there is just an arbitrary threshold at which copyright places the derivativeness to be too close to originals. I mean, yeah, one could make that argument that like all art is derivative because all art is influenced by the person's previous experiences and other art they've seen. So in that sense, it's kind of all derivative. One could make that argument, but that's not really related to this speech. So I'm not going to talk about that further. But regardless of that, I would say that all art is valid anyway. So regardless of its level of derivativeness, it's irrelevant to this position of mine, because I just say that it's all valid anyway. So I don't care how close it is to some quote original unquote for it to be too close or whatever. It doesn't matter, because all of that is irrelevant, because all derivative works are valid regardless of their level of closeness to the quote originals unquote. So yeah, it is all valid, all the derivatives, and the people trade those away temporarily to get more works being made because of all the monetary incentives and such that are given to the authors. That's the premise of copyright. That's the premise. That's what copyright is. It's a compromise. The people are supposed to get something back. It's to promote the creation of the arts for the benefit of the people. Yeah. You know, the Constitution of the United States of America said something about that. I don't remember the exact quotation, but it's kind of ironic that the Constitution of what is a republic has a statement about the copyright, and it's supposed to be for a short period of time, and it is supposed to be for the benefit of the people. But of course, USA has failed in many regards. Despite being a republic, it doesn't really follow its constitution in any meaningful ways a lot of the time anymore. So that's kind of unfortunate. You know, there's a lot of great potential in United States of America. I kind of like their constitution to some extent, where like they do have some good rights there, but they just kind of failed at following them. Now, of course, USA being the big push for the extending of copyright with like the companies like Disney, they just extended the copyright there on and on and on and such. And yeah, of course, USA being a big cultural influence in the world too, and like, of course, there are all kinds of weird trade deals that the United States of America makes with like other smaller countries, and then with those trade deals they also include copyright there, so that the USA can enforce copyright law on the rest of the world. That's also kind of unfortunate. But yeah, it's not like the USA is alone. The EU has copyright, and like kind of every place has copyright law for some reason, but not everyone enforces it. But who cares about geopolitics? That's not really relevant to this speech. But yeah, it's just something worth noting because, well, I mean, I guess it's just kind of interesting. USA, of course, is the big culturally important thing in the modern world. So that's interesting to note for that reason. A lot of media, a lot of people are exposed to comes from USA. So yeah, USA Constitution really has a statement about the copyright supposedly existing for the benefit of the people. So what is it that the people get, specifically in USA in this case, from extending the copyright on and on and on? There has to be an actual argument, because I'm not only talking about my own point of view and my own ethical stances, I'm actually talking about the USA Constitution. So there better be some explanation in their law at least. Now I'm not American, so it's not really too relevant to me. But it is still something interesting to talk about. And they are very prevalent in the world of culture, in the contemporary world. Yes. I mean, actually, I actually do have a reason beyond just my interest in USA to actually talk about USA specifically. This speech will be going to a platform that is American. Oh yes, of course. YouTube is an American company. No, I mean, it's a part of an American company. It's Google. Now, this will also go to my EAP site on the I2P network. That has nothing to do with the USA. But one of the places where I will be distributing this speech is an American platform, actually. So yes, that is actually a connection that is relevant to my speech, so I'm not just talking nonsense. So yeah. Oh, and also, on that platform specifically, a big portion of my audience is Americans also. Right, anyway. Enough with the random geopolitics. Copyright law lasting beyond the death of the author is beyond insane. It is absurd, it is ridiculous, it makes no sense on any level. The people get nothing for it when they are supposed to get something in exchange for copyright being present. Oh, and also, what does it mean for copyright lasting for a short amount of time? At the very most, I would say something like 30 years. And that's like the highest. It's like the highest. That's not my recommendation, that's not my preference, that's the highest, the absolute maximum, I say. Better would be something like half of that, I say. So like, that would be my preference, like, I mean, it's better, that is. Of course, my preference is always to have as little as possible, but we're talking about the copyright as a compromise, and we implement copyright as a compromise specifically, and we were talking about that. That is the context. So given that concept, and we are implementing that concept, now whether I actually agree with that idea and whether I would actually implement it, that's different. But if we are talking about that thing, and I was tasked to implement it, then given that premise, that context, something like 15 years perhaps would be more reasonable. 5 years, even as low as that, could be. So say 5 to 15 years perhaps, like within that range. Like that's a sufficient range, I say. 5 to 15 years. Yeah. At the very most, the absolute most highest would be like 30 years. Like if there was some possibility to like extend it, like some optional extensions where like copyright by default lasts, let's say 15 years, and then it could be optionally extended to last another 15 years and things like that, you know. So things like that could exist potentially. So with those kinds of things, if such things were to be implemented, then like at the very most 30 years. That's like the very highest. So anything beyond that is just ridiculous, it's just too much. It's not worth anything anymore. Oh, and also, to extend the copyright would also cost money. So it's not something that can be just done. So by default, the copyright would lapse after the period of time, and then it would cost money to extend it. And also, of course, this is totally arbitrary and it could be implemented in any number of ways. The copyright by default could last only 5 years, then it can be extended for no cost for 10 years, and then after that it can be extended for a charge of money for another 15 years. So that is 5 years by default, another 10 years optionally with no charge, and then 15 years with paying money. And that's just totally arbitrary. That's just something I just thought of just now. I just pulled that out of my ass, so to speak. That's just off the top of my head. So yeah, that's just some random thing I just came up with. Something like that. Just to propose just to explore the possibilities. So something like that. That's the kind of thing, towards that direction. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I would go for. If I was to make a copyright system, that's more reasonable, that makes sense. It makes sense, at least. So we are talking about copyright as a system that takes the people's freedoms and rights and then trades them away for the public to get something in return for that. The system I just described, it makes sense. It does something useful, it actually might work. And the neat thing about it lasting only 5 years at first is that if there's something that is a total useless thing that did not make any money, then the people, they might not feel the need to renew the copyright at all. Even if it doesn't cost money at first, but and it also might. It could cost money at any point. So to renew the copyright any number of times it could cost money. So even the first one could cost money. Like I said, it's just totally arbitrary. And I just totally made that up just now. I just made that off the top of my head, so totally arbitrary. So yeah, that would kind of promote the idea that a lot of work would just go to the public domain after 5 years. But some works would go as far as 30 years, for example. And still 30 years is really high. So it doesn't have to be up to 30 years. That's just the level at which it becomes too much. So it doesn't have to be 30, it doesn't have to target 30. It could be 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. So it's just 15 total. That's also perfectly reasonable, I say. Because like I said, 5 to 15 years is my preference. So yeah. Actually, that's probably the one I would pick. Yeah, that's probably the one I would pick if I was to be tasked to make a copyright law right now. Someone came to me and said, implement a copyright law. And I was to do that. So I would probably do 5, 5, 5. 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. And both renewals would cost money. So at first 5 years by default for no charge, then pay for another 5 years, then pay for another 5 years. So that perfectly matches with the 5 to 15 years I mentioned as my preference. 30 being the uppermost limit. Really what that's about is just about the compromise. If there was a lot of pushback, if there was other people I needed to compromise with. If I wasn't alone in the decision-making process, if I needed to compromise with other people who were too unreasonable and wanted too much copyright, then I might be able to push as far as 30 years. So that's what that really means. So it doesn't have to be up to 30 years. That's just the most I would compromise for. That's the largest compromise I would go for then. That's what that meant. But I did also propose the hypothetical scenario where it could last up to 30 years. But again, that might be the compromise. So if I had to, in some political context, with other hypothetical people who I would be making the decision with, who were asking for too much copyright, then I could at the very most go for 30 years. That's the biggest compromise. And the kind of system that I would then go for is the one I described with the 5, 10 and 15 years. The periods. Right. Okay, well I think I've talked enough now. That's enough for this speech. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.